We welcome everybody today to our part 4 of a presentation by Dr. Gregory Watson on exercising management roles and frontline leadership today. The organizers today were not available due to other things. So my name is Howard Zwick, and I'm going to moderate today and do some introductions and handle the Q&A part. So we welcome everyone that's joining. And first, we want to just a little housekeeping, which is that the July ASQ LED regular webinar will be on Wednesday, July 14th, and it's implementing CI into academic accreditation process, so a little bit of higher education discussion, and that will be Dr. Eli Abba. And then part 5 of this series will be on July 29th, and part 6 on August 26th. I will be texting or chatting out the links to both the July 14th and July 29th webinars. So if you have not already made your registration, you will get those chat to you, and you can just use those and copy them and paste them into your browser whenever you get a chance. So at the end of this webinar, something automatically within the next 24 hours, you should get an email with the certificate of attendance that you can get your RUs. I believe it's 0.1 RU that you'll get for today. So you'll get that email. Should there be a problem with that email, you can contact Manny Veloso or someone on the LED committee. Manny's name has been on some of those emails, and you can contact them, but you should get this automatically in about 24 hours. We will be recording today's conversation, and we will be posting the webinar from today, along with the previous 3 webinars. Should you have missed them or want to see them again, they are going to be on the YouTube channel for the LED group, and I will also probably chat that out as well. If you have a question today, we are going to go through 45 minutes or so of presentation, and then the questions, please write them into the question box, and I will collate them, and we'll be asking Dr. Watson at least some of those questions at the end of the presentation. So a quick introduction of Dr. Watson. Actually, I'm going to let him do that himself, but he is certainly a distinguished speaker, and it's great to have him as part of the LED group and presenting this to so many of us to pass on the message. So with that, Dr. Watson, yeah. So with that, I mean, these are the things here. I'll text those out. I'm going to pass on the presentation now to Dr. Watson. Let him get started.
Okay. And Howard, are you recording yet?
It is being recorded.
Okay. Very good. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to be dealing now today with the 4th in this series, Elevating Individual Responsibility Through Motivation. And we're going to talk about some topics that are part of the fundamentals of Japanese daily management systems. And the first of these is around this concept of employee motivation. It's really the foundation to everything that happens in daily management in a Japanese organization. And they have a phrase they call Jei Kotai Kankatsu, which means individual ownership of the work that you're being done. And this operates as an individual within a concept of a self-regulated management system, which is called Jisu Kanri. That's the same Kanri as in Hoshin Kanri, which means management system. And Jisu is talking about a self-directed management system. And these are both shaped by the motivation theory, which is translated into action through team activities, which are called Jisuken, which is the same root Jisuken teams, or work improvement teams that are collectively together bringing the individual selves towards a common activity. So JKK, as it's more commonly called, is a concept of process ownership by workers. And it's supported by the concept of daily management, and it's guided by how they assign decision rights to assure that poor quality is not passed on to the next step in a process. This is what Shigeo Shingo called zero QC. In other words, that you don't have a QC function operating, but the individual takes responsibility for the quality of that work. And JKK also engages workers in their responsibility to seek continual improvement of standard work. So it's applicable at all levels. It's not just workers in a production line. JKK also applies to supervisors of production line, and there they focus not on the work that's being done by the workers, but on the management of the flow. And it's also being done by the manager, like the factory manager. And there they're looking at the overall improvement of the system, and the executive is looking at the ownership and overall improvement of the business. So what we see is this is the way that quality responsibility is shared. Everyone is responsible for the quality of their own work and for the work of those who are on their team. So we see that this responsibility is hierarchical in the sense that it's cascaded downwards in terms of responsibility. So supervisors also responsibility for the quality of their work of their workers. The objective of this is called WA, and this term is an old Japanese concept. Matter of fact, it's the same word as used for the original capital of Japan, and it implies peaceful unity and conformity in a work or a social group, where the members prefer continuation of the harmony or their way of working together over their personal interests. And this is what they're calling now workplace vitalization in Toyota, which is the theme of their current quality systems. And it's basically a function of humanized work activity. Jisu Kanri is the second term, and it actually means the self-mastery management system. So here, every worker is an inspector, and this applies to independent, self-regulated, or autonomous work, and where we have voluntary participation and self-control of the working system by each individual in that company. Jisuken is a management-driven Kaizen activity. So this is a team, and the literal meaning of Jisuken is a fresh set of eyes. And this reminds me of the idea in accounting where you have the auditor or somebody there who is the second set of eyes looking at something. And the idea is that by having a fresh set of eyes, you'll see a different viewpoint. And if a worker is too close to a problem, they may not be able to see what's wrong in their process. And they become so accustomed to the waste, it looks like it's value-adding work, and they can get confused. So it no longer looks like work waste to them. So this perspective is achieved by a Jisuken team, and that means there are multiple people looking over your shoulder. And when we see this, we see that one job of all workers is to help each other, so they can achieve this harmony of WA, if you will, in the workplace. So how is it all put together as a system? Well, we have individuals, each of them responsible for their own quality of work. That's Jisu Kanri. And then we see this as collectively. So this is how they learn self-mastery and control as individuals. Then they come together as a team, and they have this team Jisuken coming together, and they also have this team J Kotai Kankatsu. So they collaborate in shared ownership. So the shared ownership is over some part of that productive system. And then the team works together to improve standard outcome. That's Nichijo Kanri, that's the daily management system. And then we see that this team is also operating under this concept of Hinshitsu Kanri. Hinshitsu is the basic word for quality. And so it's the quality management system to control the quality outcomes of the process. And so we see these ingredients, if you will, are knitted together in the system of work that delivers quality outcomes in the organization. So the collaboration is actually a Kanri of Kanris, or a management system of nested management systems. So we start talking about this, we see that if we want to motivate workers, we have to give them self-control so they can accept the personal responsibility, work in collaborative teams to achieve harmony. And the enabler of this is leadership. And it's focusing on a culture of humanity. And this goes to the Japanese word Bushido, which is a guide for culture or a way of working. And a spirit of continuous improvement, which is Kaizen, which means to make for the better. And the opposite of that is Kaiken, which is to make for the worse. We don't want to have that. We want to have make for the better. And it's also an open and honest mind. This is a Sanao mind. That means you're flexible and able to think differently and adaptable to new ways of working. And then we sit back and reflect on things. How can we make things better? That's this constant state of mindfulness, or hansei. It builds our personal awareness of what's going on, And that allows us to have this attitude of ownership, JKK. The motivation is stimulating workers' enthusiasm to work. It's an act of persuasion by management. So management first needs to understand, and then they can be understood. So management needs to pay attention to what's happening in that workplace. How are the workers actually operating? Now, interestingly enough, a lot of Japanese motivation theory was imported from the West in the 1960s. A lot of the books on motivation theory, notably Frederick Hertzberg's books on motivation to work, which was written in the 1940s, I believe, in the first edition. It was translated in Japanese in the 1960s. And many of the large Japanese companies paid for those translations. And Hertzberg greatly influenced the Japanese theory of work psychology. His theory of motivation was called HM, or hygiene motivator. And he says there are two types of factors that influence human behavior. So the hygiene factors are the first thing. This is what Dr. Kano called the must be. We have to get this done. If you think about this in terms of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are the bottom of that hierarchy. This is the security needs that have to be met before you can move up his hierarchy. On the other side of Hertzberg theory are the motivators. And this is those factors that appeal to the higher purpose in people. What's the meaning of life? You know, why am I here? What am I doing? How do I feel good about things? Kano called this attractive quality. And basically the Kano model is built on Hertzberg's HM theory of motivation. Was not built on Maslow's theory. Now, the Japanese theory of motivation, it does away with doubt. It's do. And so Yoshio Kondo, who wrote the principal book on this subject in Japan, said motivation is stimulation of a worker's enthusiasm for doing work. And when I look at this, I see motivation entails education. Education accelerates experience. It's enablement. So that means you have the capability to go and actually do, and exercise to encourage excitement. So you not only have this ability to go do, but you can actually go and do it. You have that freedom. And that's what's encouraging this excitement in this Japanese system. Now, the Japanese perception of human activities, it talks about this in the book by Kondo. And he says, what are the core characteristics of human activities? And one of the early equality people in the late 1940s was Elizaburo Nishibori. He was a very interesting man. He went to the top of Mount Everest. He wintered over in Antarctica, and he even designed a nuclear icebreaker. But he said work consists of an activity, some physical action. Creativity, something is produced of value, and sociality, that it's done for other people. So that was his basic definition of work. And then we see that there was another gentleman, Takazani, who wrote about the brain physiology. He studied, if you will, with Nishibori about monkeys and how their brains function. And Takazani said there's two components in the brain, the creativity, the neocortex, what we call the frontal lobe, where creativity happens, and then sociality, or the hinterbrain, or the, if you will, reptilian brain. Some people call this the mammalian brain for the frontal cortex, and the back brain, the less developed brain, the reptilian brain. And we see that each of these basically has different functions. But if we see that there is one that overlaps that's in both parts, and that's this being happy and sad. So no matter what, human beings can always understand that type of emotion. It's embedded in our mind, no matter how our mind is working, no matter what type of Myers-Briggs score you may have, we all understand this act or this state of being happy and sad. The model that's used for motivation in Japan came out of a logical study that Yoshio Kondo conducted for the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers. He reported it out in 1987 in Japanese, and it was translated into English in 1989. And it's still, I think, one of the best works on motivation. And he said, you know, the way you motivate the person here is the orange box, is there's three components. First is that you have to give them good job design. And that came from this program called Training Within Industry that taught about job design. The second is you have to understand humanity of the worker. How do they actually work? And this came from Takazani's concepts. and as deployed in the definition of Nishibori. And the third is there is a role of leadership, and leadership provides guidance and encouragement from the superiors or the supervisors. And those three together are where we see self-control happening. But that self-control is the obligation of each workers. So leadership creates inclusive management, getting people working together. And when we take a look at this concept of self-control, we see there's four components of it. One is this attitude of respect for humanity. That's Bushido, if you will. The attitude of continual improvement, Kaizen. The attitude of reflective mindfulness, Hansei. And this attitude of ownership for work, that's JKK. And so when we have all of this put together, the person starts getting better and they challenge themselves to get better. And then as we move to the right there, we see that as they improve in their ability, they start getting confidence. And they get confidence and for participation. So now they can be a part of the Jasuken teams. And then they start developing a keen interest in others because they start seeing in that team that their work is being affected by others and their work affects other people. And this then creates teamwork, which is the concept of wa, this harmony, where everyone is coming together, working to a common good. Now, organizational design of standard daily work I've talked about before, and we see this is in the SDCA cycle. And I talked about how there's two components here. There's the five rule decisions, and then there's the 5 S's. And so we start seeing it begins by standardizing, make rule, teach rule. And then we get to the do of standardize, and that's keep rule. And so we see that that is the Siri-Sitan part of the 5 S's. The check rule is the Sisu part. And we see that routine operations are keep rule, check rule, keep rule, check rule. As long as the check steps goes on and there's no problem, that's all the worker has to do. But when the check step says there's something out of control, then they come down to act. And act is about changing the rule. And this is Seketsu. This is Kaizen. So the interesting thing is Seketsu, if we take a look at how things are described, it's called standardization. It's not. And that's a very bad description. It's actually getting even deeper in the practice of Sisu. And so then we see at the end, when we go back to the make rule after the change and teach rule after the change, this is Shitsuki. This is the concept of how do we maintain the capability for the future. So as we take a look, process QA is this check rule. That's about making sure we know what we're doing, we're following things according to standard work. And as long as we are, we have this do check type of activity for the routine operations. So assigning rules creates the standardization. And that's the process by which a daily management system is created. Now, a majority of the learning actually occurs on the job for the workers. The Toyota system has 5 levels of learning. The 4 levels in the orange block here are basically what happens in classroom and then in structured learning environments like simulations or reinforcement and team discussions. The 5th level, on-the-job training and practice, occurs in the job environment under the guidance of a supervisor. That's 70% of the total learning. 30% comes out of the classroom. So what we see is that most of the learning is very pragmatic. It's a practical thing. Somebody's showing you what to do, and they use a point and say thing. So you have your standard, and you read the standard work, you point at the attack, your act. Excuse me. I got it.
So the point and say is you point at the task you're going to do on the job list, then you point it on the task, and then you do it, and then you go back and forth while a supervisor watches you go through that process. I see a spelling error here, but education accelerates learning. It doesn't, whatever that says. But experience enables the knowledge. So what we see is that worker motivation is developed using processes of work design, the consideration of the humanity of workers, and by the supervisor's encouragement in the process. So this occurs in a process that's called triple loop learning. Improvement is indeed a learning activity, and it occurs everywhere. The check and study steps of the SDCA, PDCA cycles are the point where reflective practice occurs. This is where Hansei is occurring. And this reflective process is this internal process of self-control or self-management, JKK. And it's where the person is constantly learning to increase their knowledge by thoughtfully considering what it is they're doing and new ways of doing that. So this has the capacity to reflect on their own actions as they're conducting work to improve future outcomes. So reflective practice requires an ability to assess an evolving issue, a problem, situation, or work outcome with respect to its inherent uncertainty. In effect, it's developing insightful observations that are stimulated by this tacit understanding of the situation, what you have intuitively perceived from the work. So what we see is the Gemba is a dojo, and a dojo definition is a place of immersive learning. In other words, I remember teaching my grandson how to swim. I threw him in a swimming pool, but he was supervised the whole time. And the question is, does he know what to do? And sure enough, he does know what to do. And my daughter was in the pool with him, so if he had any problems, it wasn't an unsafe circumstance. Now, Peter Drucker, I have a lot of admiration for him. He says, we now accept the fact that learning is a lifelong process of keeping abreast of change. And the most pressing task is to teach people how to learn. And so he said, management is doing the things right. Leadership is doing the right things. There's nothing as so useless as doing efficiently something that should not have been done at all. And then he said, the most important thing to do the right thing then is, the more important thing is to do the right thing than it is to do things right. So choosing carefully what we do is most important. And he offered 4 questions for reflection. Are we doing things right? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing the right things in the right way at the right time? And then the question for management, how do we decide what's right? So strategic inquiry is asking the right question at the right time. And this is built into this learning process. So the first loop in a triple loop learning system is about control. It's Gemba 1. It's what's happening there. Workers have 2 jobs, do the work and improve the work. And this is the world of Kaizen and routine operations. 80% of their time, they should be doing the work. And the other 20% of the time, distributed among the check, act, and standardized activities. So responsibility of the working Gemba is basically the workers doing the work, expanding work to adjacent areas as they go through and build teamwork and create this collaborative effect. And then they improve the efficiency of their own work and increase the integration of their work with the rest of the system. And they can then start understanding the system-wide implications of what it is they're doing. So here in Gemba 1, they do work and improve work. And what we see in this first, if you will, learning loop, we see that there is process action, it's creating results. And when we see this, the single loop learning is asking the question, are we doing things right? So we're analyzing the task content. And we start seeing what are the actions that we have that gave us the results. So this is where problem solving occurs, if you will. And so Gemba 1 is focusing on what we call muda waste. The losses come from flow or quality inefficiencies. There's an internal impact of productive losses, and that's high. And removal of muda is delegated then to the workers. So Gemba 1 does value-adding work in the organization. And we learn by managing our work processes. We learn by doing working experiments. And we reflect on what we do to find a better way to do that work. We reject ways of working that are bad, and we embrace ways of working that are good. So we learn by doing daily experiments, trying little things, and incrementally, step by step, making that process better. So in this first loop, we're solving immediate problems. And Chris Argus, the Harvard psychologist, called this single loop learning, and he said, it's detection and correction of errors or learning what to do.
So some of the process things are we document standard work, we get discipline of process measurement, we assure quality and review of work, we do corrective and preventive actions, and we change the standard work definition so we have quality. So this loop one is about gaining control of work as a learning process. The elements of this, it's basically we want predictable outcome. All process workers should be doing. We have standardization, problem solving, process improvement. It's happening every day across the whole integrated system. And we're looking at work standard problem solving methods and process improvement methods. And the idea is to eliminate waste and defects in all processes everywhere. And this is a key job in any workplace. So loop one is learning about the past and the present. As Duran said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. So experiential learning occurs when knowledge is transferred by direct participation in an action learning environment. It's not a passive approach. It's not like sitting in a school or formalized lectures and so forth. A person is confronted by a real world experiment and they learn as they try things to figure out how do I make that better. So this is the type of learning that occurs on the job where knowledge transfer is done because we're overcoming observed failures and mistakes in performance. And we have a coach that's guiding us through that outcome. That's the supervisor. So this reflective practice of examining standard work, doing a job, is the cornerstone of this single loop learning. So learning becomes a result of experience. And without experience, we don't learn. Now the second loop, we're talking about improvement. And so we have Gemba 1, and now we start embracing Gemba 2. So what happens in this check step is that we get to the point where the workers no longer have the decision rights, the responsibility, or the resources perhaps to make a change happen that they need to do. And so that means they enter in that check step the PDCA cycle. And so the PDCA cycle is then managed by the supervisor. And this is the process of driving change management. So this is, if you will, the very beginning of a Hoshin-Connery process. It's work process level, and we're doing the work and improving the work, but now we're upping it up to a level where there's some more resources and responsibilities to get the job done. So we're now entering, if you will, this Hoshin world of change management. And this Gemba 2 is managed by the supervisors. So here we see that their job is to document the standard workflow, train the workers, monitor the flows, check the worker performance, facilitate the problem-solving teams, assure that there's balance in the system so they achieve WA, solicit ideas and manage those experiments, and also recommend system-wide performance to management, and also then participate in those things. So the supervisors train the workers and manage the flow. So we take a look at this triple loop learning process, we see that this is now going to business learning. So it's no longer just about process learning, but we're no longer asking, are we doing things right? We're asking, are we doing the right things? Do we have, if you will, our structure, our priorities right? And so now we're talking about the process content. So Gemba 2 losses are concentrated on Mura type of waste, flow waste. Losses come from non-aligned workflows, and removal of this Mura waste is a functional task. So we manage the flow to eliminate waste. And we also take a look and we start seeing there's some assumptions and methods here. So we have to apply evidence-based thinking to understanding what's in the process. We need to seek continual improvement and pursue a total systems approach. So we're actually now building the system, not just the process, so that it works to achieve the overall objectives. So this second loop, if you will, is questioning the system of learning. How do we learn? So we're correcting, if you will, underlying principles, theories, policies of the organization, but are we doing the right things? Are we doing them in the right ways? So some of the elements are here, do we have standard mechanisms for problem solving, risk and failure analysis, performance measurement, planning, linking and aligning the organization, a standard vision that we deploy, and standard processes for change management? So all of these elements need to be defined and standardized in the business system to be able to create the type of systems we see at these leading companies like a Toyota or a Komatsu. So double loop learning, we start seeing we have some other questions to ask here. Why? We're doing this so we can remain in the management system at state of the art. We don't want to fall back into just a routine rut of doing things. We'd like to keep improving the way our management system works. It's done by the professional staff. It's not done by the frontline manager. So this can be a function of the quality organization. And the idea is that we develop and improve the standards that are applied in the single loop processes. This is done on a regular review process. It could be quarterly, biannually, or annually. And it's the centralized function for standards, but it's distributed across the organization when we look for the inputs. That becomes very important when we're taking a look at digital systems, because it's this distribution that we need to understand for how data comes together. The how of this is we review lessons learned, best practices from failed projects, and we strive to increase the performance of our projects. So the idea is that we're going to develop a functioning system for daily work management. Now, Duran also said all projects, all change occurs one project at a time and in no other way. So improving the methods and tools which are employed in daily work is an important task of the supervisor. And increasing the ability of workers to do their job means they have to get new resources, increased decision rights, increased control over the work. And so managers can encourage this self-generation of productivity through participative engagements of the workers. That enables JKK. So they manage improvement of process capability while increasing their personal confidence. So in this way, the workers are provided the control that allows them to effectively manage their own improvement activities, Jisoo Kanri, and to accept ownership. So design in depth change management needs to happen into all organizational levels. Loop 3 starts taking a look at strategic change. And here we see Deming's Plan, Do, Study Act. And the study is occurring at the same point in time as the check step, but it's a different perspective. It's management's look. And instead of looking at, do we improve standard work or do we have a breakthrough project, it's actually asking, what do we need to transform this organization to achieve its purposeful objective? Is it moving towards its vision? Is it achieving its goals? Is it applying its culture? Those are the purposeful aims. So Gemba 3 is this driving cultural change to change the purpose and goals. So the responsibilities here are to study the whole business system from implications about externalities. Look at strategic direction, craft the corporate culture, manage the resource flows in the organization, allocate decision rights and operational responsibilities to people. Assure that balance in life happens for the people in the organization, and also then solicit investment funds from the outside to achieve the strategies, communicating with ownership and the public, and recommending governance policy to the board for approval, and then finally participating in company-wide improvement projects. So Gemba 3 is setting the strategy and providing the resources. So when we look at this triple loop learning process, we see now we're asking this question: how do we decide what is right? So this is about the strategic content. Are we setting the right direction? So this is the context of the organization we're looking at. So Gemba 3 waste is Mori waste. Are we making the right decisions about what we need to do? And this type of waste is usually informally addressed. And actually probably that's probably a problem, but that's actually the case. It's usually done on an ad hoc basis when problems come up, not by probing the processes to understand what's going on. So what we would like to do is to align actions to achieve a long-term vision. So we need to build a system of people and processes. And I've called this in the past, engineering your business as a system. So how do the people and the processes work together as a productive system? And we see this triple loop learning is learning what we need to learn. How do we need to do things differently? And so this triple loop learning is actually thinking about the overall context of this organization's culture. What are we doing together? And so we have to create our culture strategically. And that's not just the job of the workers, that's the job of the executives. So why? Well, we have to understand what needs to influence strategy. This is a job for the executives, and it can be facilitated by quality leaders. In most companies where I've worked personally, that has been the job of the chief quality officer to facilitate the leaders through these discussions. Oops. And then we need to focus on what is this organizational process for change, and this should be done usually as a prelude to the strategic planning cycle of the organizations. And so it can be conducted in an orchestrated management meeting. Some people will use business excellence criteria as questions to address this, but there's some sort of self-assessment of maturity and identification of opportunities to improve. So we want to make sure that we get improved process capability for those areas that contribute to strategic intent. So this is about executive level learning to increase competitive agility. Now, learning about the future, Deming said, one is born with a natural inclination to learn. Learning is a source of innovation. So what we see in learning is we're looking at new possibilities, strategic alternatives, scenarios or options that create future opportunities or avoid threats. So scenarios can be used to stimulate or to test conditions and decisions and determine what possibilities we need to have. So the method of designing new capabilities and identifying areas as future competence will provide the organization this capability to face uncertainties in the future. And that's what this strategic dialogue needs to do. So everyone must never stop learning. That includes all levels, all people in the organization. And we can see we can describe this as the 3 R's. So responsibility, resources, and rights. So Taiichi Ono said, when you go to the Gemba, ask what you can give them. Do not go to scold them. That's not the way of Kaizen. And the 3 gifts that you have to give people are responsibility, resources, and decision rights. That enables them to conduct their JKK or ownership of the work that they've been assigned to do. So don't go to the Gemba empty-handed. Go and ask, what can we do to help you get through those things that are blocking or barriers? So responsibility is this duty or obligation to manage or control activities that are assigned or assumed in terms of getting them to their successful conclusion as an outcome. And there are lots of new obligations of management. And what we see here is that these obligations are considered here. I'm not going to read the whole list, but we see many of these look an awful lot like Deming's 14 points, but they're reduced somewhat. But the idea is that we need to put all of those together in place. And so Deming said the greatest waste is failure to use the abilities of people to learn about their frustrations and about the contributions that they are eager to make. And I think this actually wraps up an awful lot what we need to do. And the responsibilities also, we see change as a function of levels. So the Gemba is a learning environment where lessons are learned at every level. Now, self-regulated management is the secret. The core ingredients in developing Jisu Kanri are clearly defined work objectives and procedures, well-designed work measurement systems, and delegation of decision rights that enable the worker to self-regulate the direction of their work. And we see that this responsibility, this JKK, personal responsibility, is for delivering customers quality results. And so each part of the organization has a different type of focus. So workers accept personal responsibility for the outcomes and the ownership of their standard work. Managers take the responsibility for the quality through the actions and for the flow in developing that flow of quality work. Leaders have this organizational responsibility for the culture where everyone understands how they are connected to the customers. So all aspects of the system must be operating collaboratively. So everyone has a unique quality responsibility. Each person is responsible for improving quality in their own way. So workers, their own work, supervisors, end-to-end flow, functional managers, cross-functional work, executive assuring resources, and the executive in charge must have an unrelenting intent to pursue improvements of all kinds. So everybody is responsible for quality, and everybody has to accept responsibility for self-management so they give their contribution to the system. And we take a look at this structure across these 3 levels. And what we see is that there are Jasukan teams at each levels. And notice at each of these levels, we see there's some sort of team. There is some sort of method. So 3S for workers, self-inspection is the inspection process. Here we have project teams. They're exercising a process of management. They use a Gemba walk to go out and take a look and understand. At the executive level, we have cross-functional teams. They have the S7 strategic methods, and they use a presidential review when they need to inspect something really wrong in the business. So everybody is there to encourage delivery of goodness and prevent the occurrence of badness. And each of these levels focuses on a different perspective of how to do that. So the critical role in this process is inspirational supervision. The supervisors must be engaged in daily work process and encourage the workers. So workers need to develop performance pride as well as joy in work. And stimulating worker desire to work is what the best supervisors do to create harmony in work. So the job of the supervisors is to train their workers in all fundamental skills required to do the job at the competence where they can do it with the required quality. But supervisors must also assign responsibility to workers and provide them with the resources to do their job. And what we see is that Japanese supervisors have a very different job descriptions than many of their Western counterparts. And when I work in many of the Western companies, I see that the supervisors basically just want to tell people what to do and say, follow the instructions. And they don't really care in the same way about how do I actually encourage people and help them to become enthusiastic about their quality of their work. There's one other person who's worthy of talking about here. And this is what's called a mizumashi, and it's a water spider. And so we see that this spider here is actually heavier than the water, but the way its system is operated, it distributes its weight so that it can actually walk across the meniscus of the water without drowning. And so this is a person in a production line who's primarily a deliverer of materials that are necessary, working with changeovers, and helping people who are less experienced to get their job done. And as they get more experience, they start, actually helping new workers, and they're then going to be the supervisor of that worker as they learn their standard work. And this is actually a rite of passage in Japanese systems towards becoming a supervisor. So first, you become a worker, you move up and you learn different cross-functional jobs. Then you become the mizumashi, and then you work on the material flow. And normally in Western companies, what I see is the material people are the lowest part of the job. They're not the highest part. And they certainly have no responsibility for moving into supervision ranks afterwards. So what we see is that this process of mastery, it's called shuharui. So first we develop a core competence, and then we develop independence. So shu is keeping. What that means is I can follow the kata. I can follow the disciplined way of working. But to do this, I can actually now do it without supervision. That's what shu means. I can do it without supervision. That's like my first black belt project that I do without having a master black belt or somebody, a teacher, looking over my shoulder. Ha is breaking away. And this is changing the kata because we've understood that we can actually do things in a different way. So we've got some initiative. We can make it better or make it applicable to our needs. Re means going away. We're reforming that kata through some sort of innovations that change the philosophy. And this means we're developing value through people. So ownership of work creates worker pride. We change worker attitude from doing a job to producing value. So the Japanese word for making things is monozukuri. It's the basic activity of producing value from things for customers. This goes through a process of hitozukuri. And this is the way to achieve improvement in a daily work process by producing value in people, developing the potential of the workers. And this is a required step in transformation beyond production of a pair of hands, or what Taiichi Ono called fast hands, to applying all human capabilities in an imaginative way of working. The final objective is to achieve kotozukuri. This is the desired new productive state that's producing value from knowledge for society. not just for customers. So the goal in Japanese organizations, the leading ones, is to move from mono security to koto security. And that's then a major shift that's happening. So we're getting towards the end, and it's going to be time for questions, but why not, Taiichi Ono says, why not make work easier and more interesting so people do not have to sweat? The Toyota style is not to create results by working hard. It is a system that says there is no limit to people's creativity. People don't go to Toyota to work, they go there to think. So what did we learn? So motivation comes from active engagement, not just mere commitment or involvement. And at the end of this, we should have understood these three concepts, JKK, Jisu Kanri Jisuken, and we should have discovered how motivation is actually designed into the work structure, and understand how these ingredients of Jisu Kanri depend on the defined work objectives, procedures, giving the responsibility and delegating decision rights to workers. So life lessons for your, provides the lessons for your dojo. So we have time for some questions. There is going to be another seminar, the 29th, where we'll talk about cross-functional links. So we'll move from this area of working focused on Gemba 1 into the Gemba 2 discussions at that point in time. So are there some questions?
There are. Thank you for your presentation. So we have several questions that have come in, and I'll start with and we'll go through as many as we can. So, but everyone, if you have additional questions that haven't been asked already, please go into the questions box and send them to me. So the first question we'll talk about is the change rule is important if the rule is not effective. What if the item is out of control because the rule is not followed? Should it go back to reinforce the rule?
Well, if the rule is not followed, that's the job of this Mizusumashi. Part of their job is they actually audit the workers to make sure they're following standard work. And the actual process that the Japanese use is a lot more complex even than this diagram, which appears to be complex itself. But that's actually occurring in the check step. So the check step is happening at two levels. One is the worker checking themselves, and the other is the Mizumashi or the supervisor checking the worker. So if the worker is not following the procedure, then that's immediate corrective action right there where you don't have to change the rule. However, if the rule is ineffective or not working, or it's not covering a situation, then you go to the change rule situation.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next question is on Jishuken. In order to have it, would it be recommended that people from one area will visit another area and promote Kaizen?
No. The Jisuken actually occurs because you've built a long-term relation. It's not about a visit. So it's not like industrial tourism. Let's go find out what this other factory is doing. It's basically there's a commitment towards common goals and a common objective. So these people share an objective. They work together. They have integrated resource together. So the Jisuken teams are actually formed for a particular purpose or objective. And so that's actually how they operate. So it's not just about looking and seeing, it's a participative component to it as well.
Okay. So what is your thinking in choosing efficiency over effectiveness?
It's not a choice. Wrong question. Efficiency happens when you're looking at cycle time. Effectiveness is looking at output, and the two are conjoined. So it's not you're choosing one over the other, you're choosing them both together to get a system that is in a state of control.
Okay. All right, and actually, you said the word control, which is someone just wrote in, by out of control, do you mean SBC rules? What's your definition of out of control?
Out of control means that the work is not following standard work, and the result is not following the requirements for the quality of the process. SBC rules are very restrictive, and they actually don't work very well. They're single variable rules that apply to one variable, and they may or may not actually be representative of what's happening in a work process. More on that when I talk about multivariate analysis in advanced quality 4.0 techniques.
Okay.
Let me just give I gave a little tease, but let me follow through with that just a little bit more. Many productive systems have a single variable that people use, but that variable may not actually be the only one determining the quality of the work. For instance, in a chemical process, you might have a variable of flow, which determines productivity, but there might also be other variables such as pH or maybe molecular weight or turbidity or something like this. And you might have 5 or 6 variables that say we actually got the product right. So what's the one variable you use? There isn't one. And the way you put those together is not in an SBC chart, because it's only looking at a single variable. And so the way that actually is done is with a predictive modeling system where you have multiple variables coming together in an adaptive optimization filter. This is where, when I talk about SBC is becoming obsolete, this is where we need to go. We need to understand this process. It was created by a man named Rudolf Kallman in 1960. It's called Applied Optimal Estimation. And it's the next step beyond SPC. It's what Schuhart called in his hierarchy maximum control. It's a part of engineering process control.
Okay. Pivoting a little then, you've worked around the globe really, in certainly Asia and Europe and the US. Have you found that there's different responses to this type of process and leadership in different cultures, different even different types of sizes of companies? What drives success versus what drives maybe not as much success?
Well, it's an old tired saw, but basically it's leadership. I've seen these ideas work in various size companies in various cultures, but if the leaders don't believe in it, if they don't allow the system to work, or they do things to undermine the system, then it's not going to work and people will protect themselves. And the next thing you know, you've actually cut off your nose to spite your face. You don't have the quality outcome you need to have. So the companies that I've seen that actually do the best work are the ones where the leaders are effective in internalizing this concept of continual improvement and understanding their obligation to deliver not just profit in the short term, but strength in the long term. And strength in the long term comes from strong processes, good measurement systems, and so forth. Those are the foundations of profound knowledge. And I think that this is I think the biggest distinction. You know, I think we waste a lot of time in training leaders in 7 basic quality tools and all this other crap, or saying you've got to become a yellow belt. They do not need that. They need to understand, what does it mean to be a quality leader and how should they act? And believe me, I don't want them doing fishbone diagrams. I need them thinking much beyond that.
All right, great. So another question on you're back to your executive Gemba 3 area where you talked about it. You had on the slide S7 and presidential review, and one of our listeners says that those things are unfamiliar. Can you elaborate on those 2 methods?
Yeah, the S7 is the strategic 7 tools that were created by Hiroshi Osada of Japan. They are taught in the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers Executive Quality Training course. So they're very similar to what people call pest analysis in the West, but I don't like pest analysis. First, I hate the name, and second, it's too simple the way it's described, okay? But basically, it's strategic quality for the overall corporate system. A presidential review was created at Komatsu in the 1960s, I think it was. And the idea is, when the business gets so stuck and so bad and that you can't really fix any individual work process, that's when the president needs to conduct the quality development process. And so that means that the president calls everybody into the room and they analyze the problem together, and then they come up with, how are we going to attack this? And I've actually seen this happen several times where I've coached executives through that process. And usually it's in fast-moving companies where they don't have time to pay attention to all the details, but they're trying to respond to rapidly growing markets, and then they drop the ball someplace. And then somebody has to put it back together again fast so it doesn't kill the golden goose, if you will, or the goose that's laying the golden eggs. So those are our two, if you will, executive management capabilities. They will be a part of what I described in the last lecture in the series about creating an executive quality system.
Okay. All right. We'll ask one or two questions depending on how long it takes. How do you recommend that supervisors change their approach to employee motivation in a remote work environment where they cannot use the management by walking around principle to ensure employees are on track?
Well, I think I can tell you what I've done. I still am teaching black belt training, and what I've done is I've tripled up my coaching time. So I have lots more frequent one-on-ones. I don't coach for a half hour, I coach for an hour each time. I have them send me the data ahead of time. I spend a little time playing with their data and so forth, and then we have a conversation about it. Because what happens in this remote environment, we lose the human touch. And so the only way we can get that back is to increase that one-on-one time. That's probably not what everybody wants to hear, because what that means is more work. But I think that's probably about the only thing we can do right now.
So trying to create that more touch time and development is great. So last question then, can you shed light on the compatibility of the triple loop learning and complexity management and the use of the SINFIN framework? And we'll do it really quickly, so we can either do that quickly or defer.
Okay, well, that's not a quick question. So the SINFIN framework was developed by a man named Snowden, who's a Welshman. It's a Welsh term, and it talks about the differences between order and complexity theory. It's a general type of concept that you apply to, I'm gonna say you apply topically. A triple loop learning is about the learning process, whereas SINFIN is not about the learning process. It's more about the content. So when you take a look at things, you can have either a process content or a process focus or a content focus. SINFIN is looking at the content focus, and then the triple learning is looking at the process of learning.
All right, you did it quickly, and so we'll get everyone out on time. So if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, you have Dr. Watson's email right here. The best way of doing that is to email him directly, and he will send you a copy of this presentation. And again, please go to the chat box quickly and use those links that I've already sent out a couple of times to sign up for the next presentations, whether it be July 14th or the next parts 5 and 6 of Dr. Watson's series. So we thank Dr. Watson for his time today. For those that don't know, it's about midnight almost striking midnight where he is. So he's a night owl, and the sun just went down also.
No, it hasn't actually. The sun is still up. I was just going to say.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Okay. Thank you for your time, and everyone, thank you for attending, and hope to see you again in another LED presentation.
Thank you very much.